obviously for the school, they said it didn't happen. And I read in his biography that they said it didn't happen like that. But apparently he got hit on the side of the head and it put the blood across the back of his eye, and they had to actually take his eye out of its socket to clean the back of it off and then put it back in again, which is why I had the frozen pupil. But I mean, as far as I understand, it was George Underwood who did it, but I mean, whether or not it was, I don't know.
The resultant contrast in eye colour would come to signify David's otherness later in his career. In Bromley, however, he was beginning to attract attention for other reasons.
David's sort of rise to fame, although it was slow, he would after school he would be around town. He had long hair, and I can remember him specifically walking around Bromley on a Saturday and seeing him with sort of suede long boots with tassels on them. I think we wouldn't have dreamt of wearing that. We'd have been too self-conscious generally. But it didn't bother him at all. He was around, and people knew him. A lot of people knew him around town, see him. To be honest, I think most people didn't think he'd get anywhere. He was just a sort of a crazy guy at the time, different to everybody else in his style of dress, doing things that we wouldn't dream of doing.
After leaving Bromley Technical School, Bowie disbanded the Kon-Rads to join his second band, the King Bees.
Where the Kon-Rads were doing sort of R&B and soul, he went into the King Bees, and the King Bees sort of developed that further, the whole R&B thing, because he had a huge appetite. I mean, he absolutely adored Little Richard. He was listening to the Motown things that were coming through.
In 1964, they recorded Liza Jane, David's first single. A simple pop record, it vanished without a trace, and Bowie subsequently left the band. His manager, Leslie Conn, persuaded him to join the Manish Boys, a group that would bring him much greater attention.
It was a fairly established act he joined, and he wanted it to be Davy Jones and the Manish Boys, and I don't think that led necessarily to a lot of tension, but it was quite clear that, you know, he wasn't, although several times in his career he sort of retreated into a group, you know, he's always been the leader of that group as much as he's ever sort of tried to protest otherwise.
He came to join the Manish Boys in a very oblique sort of way. We had a contract with Dick James Music, which was Northern Songs, I think. And our manager at Northern Songs was Leslie Conn. And we'd been there a few weeks, and Leslie Conn said, "Would you like a new singer?" And we said, "No, thank you, we've got enough mouths to feed." So he said, "But he's good, he's great, he'll be good for you." And he has already made a record. So, you know, that sort of success could rub off on you, and who knows, you'll make a record too. So we said, okay, let's just give him a trial. Leslie brought him down on the following Sunday, and he walked into the living room where we were all rehearsing, and instantly we said, okay, that's fine. We doesn't have to sing even. He just looked the part, and he was dressed in buckskin and, you know, thigh-high boots and so on and so on. So that was it, really, and the hair. And he did sing, but we weren't so interested in the singing as we were his appearance, basically.
Even at this early stage in his career, David's sights were set solely on fame.
We were more interested in the musical content of the thing than really the fame and fortune in those days, except David, I think, because he was probably more interested in the future than he was the actual bands itself. The bands were a stepping stone to his success, really. He had his eyes set on the future, basically.
As well as gigging extensively with the Manish Boys, Bowie was also seeking the public eye from outside of the music world.
During the time of the Manish Boys, he did that thing where he was on the BBC with a campaign for long hair, where he was on Cliff Mitchell-Moore's Tonight programme talking about he'd been victimised for having long hair, which was, again, you know, talk about the sort of press officer side of things, that he already was looking for an eye to a good story.
Well, David was always up to some scheme to hit the public eye. And it was his idea to come up with this notion that he would form a society for the preservation of animal filament, it was called, which was long hair. Well, long hair in those days wasn't so long as you imagine. I mean, I've probably got long hair now, to a 60s person. And anyway, he came up with this scheme, and he got several people, famous people, to sponsor it. And we all had longish hair, you know, to back him up. And it made a lot of newspapers. Virtually all the newspapers ran the story. And then it ended up on television with the Cliff Mitchellmore Tonight programme, I think it was.
It's all got to stop. They've had enough. The worms are turning. The rebellion of the long hairs is getting underway. A 17-year-old, David Jones, has just founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men. Now, exactly who's been cruel to you?
Well, I think we're all fairly tolerant, but for the last 2 years we've had comments like "darling" and "can I carry a handbag" thrown at us. I think it's just had to stop now.
Of course, it was all just a joke, really. But it was anything to get known and get noticed.
I think he saw with the Manish Boys that quite quickly it wasn't the vehicle he wanted. And now, you know, he was almost already a veteran. He'd been through 3 groups, had a level of you know, success with each of them, and was becoming a boy most likely to.
On leaving the Manish Boys, David Jones looked to The Who for inspiration, changed his image and joined the mod-obsessed Lower Third.
If you ask people, you know, bands David Bowie was in before he was David Bowie, if you like, you know, the Lower Third is one that always sort of springs to mind. And I think this was where he started to actually find his own voice, albeit it was largely someone else's. It was the Who's, if you like, at this point, because, you know, the one thing Bowie has always been is obsessed with style, and it's always been, you know, as much part of the package as the music. And he started to completely engulf himself in mod style.
As well as being prepared to change his image to fit the times, David also decided to change an element of himself that he'd been dissatisfied with since school.
David Jones is quite a common name. Also, at that point, the Monkees had just broken big over here, and David Jones was everyone's favourite pin-up. And I think there was also a David Jones working in someone's management company. There was a lot of David Joneses around. So he looked into American mythology, which is again something he was to visit several times in his life, and go for the classic Bowie name, or Bowie as it's often mispronounced, but I think he loves Bowie now. And the Bowie, you know, from the Bowie knife, and there was all the images of him being sort of cutting at the cutting edge and the cutting blade and all of that. And here was sort of David Bowie. The Lower Third sort of did gather quite a head of steam, and they worked with Pi Records, which